Today we will be discussing about numbers. Numbers as a part of speech which is used to give more detailed information about nouns. Welcome to the Lingomaniac lessons, a corner for language learning and usage means, tips and tricks. The Lingomaniac lessons, for nerds, by nerds. I'm Jelena and I'm a master philologist. For almost 20 years I've been teaching English, French, Spanish and Serbian, and for almost 20 years I've been translating these languages with addition of Italian. Stay tuned for more. There will be more, not just about English, not just about Serbian. There will be also other languages included in this entire path, so if you find this useful, join me. So today, as we are progressing towards basically getting to formulate whole phrases and see how certain phrases in English function and why they are built and formulated that way, we will be dealing with numbers. Actually, with whole numbers, which means that we will be dealing with natural numbers and zero. When we're talking about numbers in English language, numbers are divided into three biggest categories. The first category are cardinal numbers, the second one are ordinal numbers, and the third one are nominal numbers. Now, when we're talking about cardinal numbers, those numbers show us quantity, and they are therefore usually also called as counting numbers. They give us the response to the question, how many? Now, those numbers are always whole numbers, which means that they can never include or be represented by decimals or by fractions. Now, numbers of the first decade, basically one-digit numbers, are the basis for forming and building all other numbers from the cardinal group, and also for the ordinal numbers. So these ones are basically the most important thing that we can learn today when it's about the numbers. The numbers from the first decade, or one-digit numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, are numbers which are basis for building everything else. Tenors, or so-called decades, round decades, are built by adding the suffix t, ty, to the number of the first decade, actually to the one-digit number. But there is also one very important thing to point out, that numbers that are usually either made of or include numbers 1, 2, and 3 show irregularities. Therefore, for example, for number 10, according to this logic, we would have to add the suffix t to number 1. So we would actually get 1t. But no, the first irregularity is there. Number for the first, basically the first tenor is called 10. Number next tenor, made from number 2, would also have to be 2t, but since it's very hard to pronounce it that way, there is one kind of transformation happens, and that is the basis transformation, that the 2 becomes twen. For number 3, there is also a transformation of the base, and instead of 3, we will be using 30. So 10, 20, 30. Now, when it's about the next tenor number, made from number 4, it actually took me 12 years to finally accept the fact that we also have a change of base when it's about writing, and also the pronunciation. Therefore, we are basically omitting one vowel from the base of number 4. So number 4 is always written as F-O-U-R, But number 40 will always omit the letter U. And I'm telling you, it took me 12 years to finally convince myself that that's how it should be. So, just acquire it in time. So number 4, as you can actually also hear, has the long vowel when we are pronouncing it, while number 40 has a very short vowel, short O. Numbers with 5, numbers which are made from number 5, in some cases have the change of the base, and since it ends in V, we have actually the situation where we have the reverse change. When we were talking about the plural of nouns, I mentioned that F rule, that my students actually called it that way, where we have a situation where the letter F changes into V. But this is the reverse situation. Number 5 has V, but for numbers of the second decade or for the tenors, we have the change from V to F. So number 5 is F-I-V-E, but a tenor from number 5 is number 50. So we basically have a change of V to F. With numbers 60, 70, 80, 90, please don't make it 90. It's 90. We add the suffix in the normal way. There are no specifics or specific things that we need to pay attention to. But for these previous ones, I listed the problematic things. Now, within the second decade, we usually build numbers, we form numbers by adding the suffix teen to the number of the first decade, actually to the one-digit number. Of course, as I already mentioned, the issues arise immediately with numbers 1, 2, and 3. So a number will not be 1-teen, but the number is 11. So number which is 1 for 1 bigger than 10 is 11. Number 12 and number 13. For numbers 11 and 12, we basically have a complete change, completely different form. For number 13, we have the same change of the base as we have with 30. So 3 becomes thir. All of the others until 19, actually until 20, are regular. They form it just by adding the suffix teen to the number of the first decade or to the one-digit number. So 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Now, I have to point out a very, very, important thing, because numbers are not really a thing to mess up with or to mess around with. The difference with pronunciation between T and teen. It happened to me a few times that students, who are, not middle-aged, but going slowly towards that part of life, that they say, when questioned, how old are you? They say 13. No, you're not 13. You are 30 or 30-something. So that is the usual problematic thing. How to actually pronounce these, how to make the difference between these two suffixes. It's actually very easy. When you are supposed to use the word from the second decade for those teenage period years, that's why that period is called teenage, because of the suffix teen, which is added to the number. When we are using those numbers, the stress in the word itself is actually on the suffix teen. When we are using the tenors, the stress is always on the first part of the number, or actually on the bases. So you are 13 or you are 30 years old. So please don't make 60 into 16 and 16 into 60. It is a bit of a bigger difference. Now, when we are talking about numbers which have in their form numbers 100, 1,000, million, billion, those numbers can never be in the plural. Generally, numbers, those cardinal numbers cannot be put in plural forms. Why? Because they already represent a certain numerical quantity. But especially if we're talking about numbers 100, 1,000, million, billion, we never put those nouns, we never put those numbers, because even those numbers are sort of nouns. We never put those numbers in plural form because they always have to have a certain denominator of the quantity put in front of those. So if it's, for example, 100 at stake, either you will say 100 or 100. If it is more than one, it will already be determined by the number which you use and put in front of it. 200, 500, and so on and so forth. The only situation where it is actually allowed to use forms like hundreds, thousands, millions, billions is when those numbers are used as nouns with indefinite numerical quantity. When we, for example, say thousands of people attended the concert last night or were at the concert last night, we know that there was definitely more than 1,000, but we don't know exactly how many. So in that case, when we don't have the precisely determined quantity, then it is okay to use the plural form of it, because at that point it basically becomes the noun. Thousands were at the concert last night, or thousands of people were at the concert last night, to show plural form, but without, it's somewhere similar to those collective nouns, which show us the numerical indefinite quantity. We know that there is more than one, but not exactly how many. One additional thing, especially when we are having those bigger numbers and especially mixed numbers, is that between hundreds and two-digit numbers, in pronunciation, it is advised, and it is actually a rule, to use the conjunction and. So 405, 55,254,618. So whenever you have hundreds and those two-digit numbers following behind, you should pay attention to, at least in pronunciation. I mean, you cannot really use it in the written form if you are numerically presenting a certain number, but if you are in written form presenting it in words, then you should also use the conjunction and. Now, what I would also like to point out is the specific usage of zero. Actually, how zero is called in certain situations. Because I was asked by several students so far, I actually have been asked by several students so far, because they've been listening to zero being pronounced in several completely different situations and occasions, and in some of them, they were confused. Now, as long as we're talking about the technical usage of the number, for example, like in science, we will be calling it 0. For example, today it is 7 degrees below 0. But when we are talking about it in a bit, we can say, in comparison to the science, in some a bit less formal situations like phone numbers, addresses, even dates and decimal numbers, but after the decimal point, 0 will be pronounced as the letter O. For example, someone might say, my phone number is 555-0502. So you wouldn't pronounce it as 0, but as O, because it is actually also easier to do it that way. And in more situations in life, you'll probably be in a situation to actually dictate your phone number or to tell your address or to say which date it is. Then you will be using some technical usage of the number, unless it is your profession, so you have to do it on a daily basis. Therefore, and the point, let's make it clear, the point of each language is to use as less as possible, and actually with that to produce as much as possible, to give as much information as you can. So when it's about English language, the informal, the communication style goes towards making things simpler, making things easier. So for dates, for addresses, for phone numbers, and even decimal numbers where 0 is used after the decimal point, it is pronounced as O. When mentioning the decimal points, of course, you can also have 0 in front or before the decimal point. In that case, it's either pronounced as 0, if it's some technical usage, or it is pronounced as not, which is the old word from the Old English, which basically, from which the word nothing is derived from, which is what? 0. And we have two more situations which are connected to sports. One of them is that in sports, in majority of sports, for example, like rugby, football, 0 is pronounced as nil. But in tennis and in badminton, 0 is pronounced as love. Yeah, those hearts, Cupid style. Yeah, as love. So whoever is a tennis fan probably recalls from watching the matches that the result might have been 40-love, for example, for a certain player, or some football team won the other one 2-0. So it means they had 2 scores while the other team had 0. And that's all we actually have to say about cardinal numbers. Now, moving on to the next group of numbers, and those are ordinal numbers. When we're talking about the ordinal number, as the name itself says or points out, we are talking about numbers which represent some order in line or some position. Ordinal numbers are formed from the cardinal numbers, of course, with the problematics connected to the numbers starting with or having incorporated numbers 1, 2, and 3. Majority of ordinal numbers, except the numbers from that consist of 1, 2, and 3, are formed by adding the suffix th or th in pronunciation to the cardinal number. For number 1, we add suffix st, and therefore we have the number first, which is also change of the base and change of the suffix. From number 2, we add the suffix nd, and the ordinal number is second. And from number 3, when we add the suffix rd with the change of base, of course. But what is actually interesting is that it uses the same base as those cardinal numbers, for example, for 13, 30. So basically the changed base is again third, and we add the suffix and we get third. The rest of the numbers are 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and so on and so forth. So we basically add th, unless we are talking about the nouns, well, about the numbers, which have numbers first, second, and third included. So basically, at the beginning of every decade of ordinal numbers, you will have, for example, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, and so on and so forth, again with the regularity with the th. Also note that when we are making those two-digit ordinal numbers, when we are using those tenors are always cardinal numbers. 21st, 22nd, 58th, 79th, and so on and so forth. So that's basically the procedure, how the ordinal numbers are formed and what they are used for. And now we also have to mention nominal numbers. Nominal numbers are special category of numbers. They basically show, they're used to show identity. They identify people, things, items by a certain numerical value, by a certain number. So these numbers usually represent a certain line, a string of numbers which show a certain kind of identity, and therefore vehicle numbers, route numbers, ID numbers, employee or student ID numbers, social security numbers, bank accounts, phone numbers. Basically, whenever we need to represent a certain string of numbers which has a dedicated value, which has a certain identity value, then we are using these nominal numbers. And that's the entire wisdom about how numbers, how whole natural numbers are divided in English language, how they are formed, and what they are used for. When we're talking about the decimal numbers, decimal numbers are always marked with a decimal point. Now, why am I pointing that out specifically? Because in a lot of other languages, decimals are divided by a comma, with a comma. And in English language, decimals are divided with a point, and thousands, millions, billions, and so on and so forth are divided by a comma. All of the numbers after the decimal point in technical usage are pronounced as single one-digit numbers. Why? Because in some mathematical calculations or in some technical usage, you could have a decimal number which has 10 or 15 or 20 numbers after the decimal point, and you actually don't really have, those cardinal. You don't have the cardinal numbers that can pronounce, that can be pronounced to comprise that much of that many of digits. That's why in technical usage, the most used way of pronouncing them is to do it digit by digit. When we are talking about prices, the prices are allowed to be pronounced as two-digit numbers, basically decade numbers, because you only have 2 digits coming after the decimal point. So if something costs $4.25, you will not be saying $2.25. It will be 25, and it's completely okay because it's very normal to use 2-digit numbers in everyday usage. So therefore, just make that mental note. When we are using it in a technical usage, then we are pronouncing it, then we are expressing it as single 1-digit numbers. When we're talking about the prices, it's completely normal to use 2-digit numbers. Fractions are numbers which show a part of a whole. So there is not a whole number at stake, but a part of the whole. Now, there are several different categories of fractions: real fractions, unreal fractions, mixed fractions even. But since I'm not today to give you a maths lesson, I mean, we can arrange something if you're interested, but not today. I'll just generally explain some things about fractions. Fractions they always consist of 2 different parts: numerator and denominator. Now, numerator is the number which is above that little line which makes the separation, and it shows how many parts of something we're talking about. That other part under that other number below that line is called the denominator. Now, when we are numerically presenting them, we will of course be using numbers, but the problems arise when we are supposed to pronounce them. So for the numerator, we in pronunciation always use the cardinal number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For the denominator, we always use the ordinal number. For example, 1/5. Be careful. Those ordinal numbers which are used as denominators, they can have plurals. And that usage of whether it's a singular or plural form of that ordinal number depends on the number or on the cardinal number, which cardinal number is used as a numerator. For example, you can have 2/5 of something or 3/9 of something. So just be cautious that those ordinal numbers can be used in plural depending on how many, which cardinal number is used, which shows how many parts of something is basically in a fraction. 2 of those numbers are not represented by ordinal numbers, and that is the number half, which is basically used instead of the ordinal number second, and instead of the ordinal number fourth, we will be using the number quarter. Well, basically the word quarter to describe the number. So it will be, for example, 1/2 of something, or 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and so on and so forth. And now we're actually moving to something which is very practical and which is also very debatable and debated, and can be a bit confusing in English language, and those are dates. How we actually, in English language, how we pronounce years, how we formulate the dates, how we write them, and of course the most problematic thing about dates, the date formats. So let's clear everything out when it comes to those things. Now, first thing that we will look into are years. How is it that we pronounce years? Of course, it's never a problem to write down a certain year with a numerical value. The problem is actually how to say it. Now, when we're talking about the mixed years, For example, 1953. As I just pronounced, those mixed numbers will always be pronounced as two-digit numbers, basically 2 times two-digit number. So that year will be pronounced at first as a number 19, and then we will add 53 or 63. Right now I cannot remember what is it that I said, because it was, off the top of my head. The problem arises when we have the beginnings of new centuries and the beginnings of new millennia. When we're talking about the beginning of new century, the most problematic thing is the first 9 years of the beginning. Why? Because you will have 0 in between. So those situations are basically when you want to pronounce it. It is a mathematical calculation. If we have, for example, a year which has the following numbers: 1903. How are we going to pronounce it? If you remember, I just pointed it out that 0 is, when we're talking about the dates, 0 is pronounced as letter O. So it's either 1903, 1903. And when we get to the 1910, the situation eases up a bit. So we again go back to the system of mixed years when we have 2 times two-digit number, 1910, 1925, and so on and so forth. When we're talking about the beginning of the new millennia, we refer to basically the first 99 years of the period. And again, within those 99 years, the first 9 years are most problematic. According to what we just said for the new century, we also have mathematical calculations. But these mathematical calculations, for example, if we had a year which says 2001, that would be a mathematical calculation as follows: 2 times 100, and then the rest, 1000, sorry, and then the rest. So 2001 or 2001. This 2001 is the way of, again, dividing it into 2 times two-digit number, but it is not as common. It is a more common situation to use it for the beginning of the new century than for the new millennia, but it is also allowed as a possibility. So when we get to the year, to the beginning, to actually the end of the beginning of the new millennia, so 2099 or 2099 as the form which would be more commonly used. Then we get to the beginning of the new century, and then we go back to the previous example again. So it would be 2101 or 2101. Second thing that we need to go through is the usage of day and month. Now, when we are talking about writing of dates, which consist of day and month, it is usual in English language, except if we are using it for some IT purposes, meaning some creating some databases, archives, and things like that. It is usual to have the month presented with the word, basically written with the word, not with the number. Days are presented with the number. Months are presented with the word, and of course year is presented with the number. Now, for marking the day, in English language you can use both cardinal and ordinal number, but ordinal numbers are rarely used. Where you will find them most is actually in the British English dialect of English language. Now, when we're talking about the presenting of the month, it is presented in writing as a word, And usually it is presented as a full word, especially if we're talking about some formal context. In informal context, it is allowed to actually shorten the word, which is the noun, the proper noun, which marks the month, the name of the month, to the first 3 letters of the month. And that case is applied to all of the months except May and June. Of course, May, because May consists of 3 letters, and June consists of 4, but it is never shortened, it is never abbreviated, because it already is short enough. And I also need to point out one other thing. I just mentioned that when we are marking the day, we can use either, in writing, we can use either cardinal, which is more usual form, and sometimes ordinal number. But when we are pronouncing it, it will always be in the form of the ordinal number. Regardless of if you wrote the cardinal or ordinal, doesn't matter. The pronunciation is always with the ordinal number. So if you, for example, write down 25 by number and then January, it will always be the 25th. And in that situation where you have the day first and then the month, you have to insert the word of in between. So the 25th of January, of course, only in pronunciation. You will not do it in writing. Now, the last point, which creates the biggest amount of confusion, is the time formats. Time formats are only used for numerical dates, and that's why they are creating the biggest amount of confusion. Why? Because until the end of 19th century, English language had the usage of first stating out the month with, of course, the numbers of the month, then the day, and then the year at the end. But switched to the format which refers to day, month, and year. The only country in the world which uses the Old English format of month, day, and year is the USA. So they are the only ones that actually use that format. That's why in 1988, International Organization for Standardization introduced the international date and time format. It is the ISO standard 8601. They introduced the international time format, which is actually in usage in a huge number of Asian countries. For example, Chinese and Japanese use this kind of format. When we're talking about database and archivization systems, this one is absolutely the best, because it starts with the year, the number of the year, then it adds the month, and then it adds the day. So I believe that I don't have to explain how actually it simplifies the things when we are talking about some databases, because, you know, the easiest thing is to first search for the year, and then, you know, kind of like in a drop-down menu, search for the month and then search for the day. Ever since it was introduced, it is recommended in international usage, and especially if you are using it for business purposes, it is suggested to use that format, because there is definitely no confusion when it comes to that international format, year, month, and date. Why? Precisely because of this situation, that majority of the countries in the world use day, month, year, and the US uses month and then day and then year. The famous 9/11. It is represented as number 9 and then 11, and majority of world will actually be reading it as the 9th of November. But in America, it is the 11th of September. And for example, if you have to schedule some important meetings or make some conferences, organize conferences and whatever, you cannot definitely allow yourself such situation where it can be misinterpreted, whether it's the 9th of November or it's the 11th of September, because the difference is what, 2 months. Be very cautious. My recommendation is to be on the safe side, to use the international system, year, month, and then the date, because there, at that case, there is no, possibility to get the dates mixed up. But again, majority of the countries in the world uses date, month, and time, starting from the smallest, going to the bigger, and ending with the biggest numerator, with the biggest number. And the US uses, reversed order of the majority of the countries in the world. So those are basically some of the things some curiosities and peculiarities that I wanted us to go through, which are connected to the numbers. Now, if we had to add this to the previous things that I did in the previous videos, as I said, if we're talking about some noun phrase, noun is the most important word in that phrase. Adjective is the first which describes it the best, and therefore it comes directly before that noun. And if we are also in that situation, if we also have the need, for example, to use the number to additionally explain the noun, number will be going in front of the adjective if you are using it. For example, girl, beautiful girl, two beautiful girls. If you think that this was useful, you're welcome to join me in the next videos. All of the content you'll be able to find, of course, here on YouTube. Additional materials, bonus and additional materials, as well as podcasts will be on Patreon also available, and different kinds of short clips and parts of these materials already recorded will be also available on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter.